On factoring quadratics today, and so our first lesson is on factoring using the greatest common factor. So it says anytime you see GCF, think greatest common factor. It's basically saying what is everything divisible by? So what can you divide out? The GCF can consist of constants or coefficients with variables and exponents. Factoring by GCF means we find the GCF and we pull it out of the expression, and you do that by dividing it out from each term. So if we look at examples, example 1, 4x squared plus 8x. And so many of you might be able to just do that by yourself very easily, but I'm going to show you a different way. So we break down our terms, 4x squared and 8x. So 4 becomes 2 and 2. X squared becomes x and x. The 8 becomes 2 times 2 times 2. And the x is just an x to the first. So then we want to circle what they have in common. So we have a 2 here and a 2 here. A 2 here and a 2 here. 1x and 1x. So you multiply those all together. 2 times 2 times x is 4x. And if you look at our factors, it's multiply everything. 2 times x is 4x squared. 2 times 2 times 2 times x is 8x. And then when we write out our factored polynomial, we lead it with 4x, and then it's the remainders. So our first term is just x plus 2. So we get 4x times x plus 2. We can do the same thing with number 2. So we have, if you look, we have 3 different terms. And so when we have negative 10, I'm going to make that 2 times 5. And then anytime there's a negative, go with a negative 1. 15, I'm going to make 3 times 5. Oops. And 5 is just going to be 5. And then for the x's, I have x to the fourth, so that's x, x, x. 4 x's. 15x to the third is 3 x's, and 5x is just 1x. So we circle what matches up. So if you look, each of the 3 terms has a 5 and 1x. So if you think about it, when we're factoring, it will always be, if we have a variable and they all have the same variable, it'll be the variable with the smallest exponent. So if you notice, we had an x to the fourth, an x to the third, and an x. The GCF will always consist of the one with the smallest exponent. And then inside the parentheses is going to be what we multiply by. So this first term is going to become negative 2x to the third. Our second term, if you look, will be 3x squared. And our last term, we have both things circled. So what's left over? Just a 1, not a 0, because if 5x is our greatest common factor and our one term is 5x, that means when we divide them out, it equals 1. So now we get to the final one, 24x to the third, y squared, plus 16xy to the fourth, plus 4x to the fifth, y to the third, plus 8y to the sixth. So when we do our numbers, 24, we're going to just make it 4 and 6. And sometimes you might have to continue factoring out your numbers. That's okay. 16, I'm going to make that 4 and 4. 4, I'm just going to leave as 4. And 8, I'm going to make it 4 and 2. My x's I'm going to do in yellow. So I have 3 here, I have 1, and I have 5. And then in the last one I don't have any, so I don't put any x's. And then I have y's, so I have 2 y's here, I have 4 y's here, I have 3 y's in the third one, and I have 6 in the last one. Okay, so then what do you think my GCF is? Well, let's look. They all have a 4. They all have 1 4. How many x's? Well, the first 3 all have an x, but the last one has an x to the 0 power, so there's no x's. And then y's, the lowest exponent is y to the second. So you can see it's going to be 4 y to the second will be our GCF. So when we write our factored polynomial, we start out with 4y to the second. If you look in the first term, what we have is left over is 6x squared, 6x cubed. In the second term, we have 4xy squared, so plus 4xy squared. Our third term is just x to the 5th y. The number is gone. So plus x to the 5th y. And then our last one would be 2y to the 4th. So we have 4y squared as our GCF, and inside we have 6x cubed plus 4xy squared plus x to the 5th y plus 2y to the 4th. And if a GCF is not shown, the GCF is just 1. So that's how you can solve all from that first homework assignment. Now, we're also going to go over factoring by grouping. So we're going to use GCF 3 different times here in our factoring by grouping steps. And you can only factor by grouping when you have 4 terms. So make sure you keep that in mind. Factoring by grouping, you have to have 4 terms. So the steps you see: if possible, factor out a GCF from the entire polynomial. Step 2, group the terms, the first 2 and the last 2. Then you want to find the separate GCF. So we're going to find the GCF 3 different times. We want to rewrite those expressions and then combine them. Polynomials must be written in standard form. All right, so now let's take a break and get the back page. And okay, so we have 3 different example problems, 1 easy, 1 medium, and 1 hard. So the first one is 8r to the third minus 64r squared plus r minus 8. And if you look at all 4 of these terms, when we factor each, we're going to have an 8, we're going to have a -1, an 8, and an 8, a -1, and an 8 over here. For the letters, we're going to have 3 R's, 2 R's, 1 R. So upon inspection, we can see that our overall GCF is just 1. Because they don't all have anything in common. Then we want to group. So when you group, I always put a squiggly here. And then I find the GCF of each group. First 2 and last 2. So first 2, they have an 8r squared in common. The last 2 have nothing, so that means their GCF is just 1. Now, when we rewrite this, so we have our separate GCFs here and here. When I rewrite it, 8r squared has to be multiplied by the leftovers from the first 2. So that's r and minus 8. And then I use the next GCF, so plus 1 times, and it's going to be the leftovers are minus 8. Now this is good. We want our leftovers to match up. R minus 8 and R minus 8 match up, so then we can group into factors. So our first factor is going to be R minus 8. These are the leftovers. Our second factor will be combine the GCFs. 8 R squared plus 1. So those are our two factors, R minus 8 and 8R squared plus 1. That's our answer. Our medium one. So medium. Let's see here. Break it down. 35xy. I'm going to make that 5 and a 7. Sorry about that. I'm going to make it 5 and 7. This one I'm going to make, the second one, negative 1 and 5. I'm going to make this 7 and 8. And make this negative 1 and 8. Then for the variables, I got x, x, and then I have a y and a y. So if we look, we can see the overall GCF is just going to be 1. But now we want to find the GCF of each individual part. And so let's see what we get. So for the first two, we have a 5 and an x. So it's 5x. For the second two, we have 8. So now we can write 5x times the leftover 7y, and you can see over here minus 1, plus 8, we use our second GCF, times the leftover 7y minus 1. So that is, once again, good. 7y minus 1 and 7y minus 1. If these wouldn't match up, you'd be done at this point. But because they match up, now we can group into factors. So we have 7y minus 1, because we're taking them out. Those are our remainders, our leftovers. And then we combine our GCFs, 5x plus 8. So we get 7y minus 1 times 5x plus 8. All right, now a hard one. And it's only hard because of the number of, just the numbers that we're dealing with. $224. So I tell my kids to do a factoring tree. That's 2 times 112. That's 2 times 56, and I know 56 is 7 and 8. So my factors are 2, 2, 7, 8. For 56, I'm going to go with 7 and 8. For 84, negative 84, so I know it's going to be negative 1. And that's 12 times 7, so that's 3, 4, and 7. And then negative 21 is negative 1, 3, and 7. If you're unsure, always use a factor tree to come up with your factors. And then for the variables, we're going to have A and Z, A and C, Y and Z, and Y and C. So, do they all have anything in common? And this time they do. The 7. So our overall GCF is 7. We're going to leave that there. And then we're going to find the smaller GCFs. So let's see what they are. Over here we have 8, 8, A, A. So 8A. And then on the right-hand side we have -1 and 3 and a y. So that gives us -3y. So when we write it out, we're going to have 8a times our leftovers, 2, 2, and z. So that's 4z plus c. All right, and then we have -3y times 4z, the leftovers, plus c. And so when we finish it off, we can bring back in the overall GCF out front, 7. Then we have our two leftovers, 4z plus c. We take them both out. And then lastly, we have our GCFs, 8a minus 3y. So that's our final answer, 7 times 4z plus c times 8a minus 3y. And that's it. Factoring by grouping.